When you're applying color to unspun fiber, you have an awful lot of choices, as we saw in the last video. And in fact, one of my most famous failed experiments was really instructive. I tried dyeing a stretch of commercial top, um, and I wanted to give it a kind of speckled effect. So I laid out the fiber, and then I did with different colors. And when I spun it, obviously when you're spinning, you're attenuating the fiber. So the color, the concentrations of color that looked so beautiful in the top, in the roving, didn't look like anything once I spun it into yarn. All my little speckles had vanished. Uh, when you're spinning, you also have a lot of choices about how to deal with color. And as I mentioned in the previous video, if you're curious about these methods, I strongly recommend Jillian Marino's book, Yarnitecture, and her video, 12 Ways to Spin a Braid. So what I'm showing you right now are three different colorways that, yeah, they're kind of similar because that's just how I roll. When I love a color, I use it over and over again. And then I wonder why everything in my closet looks exactly the same. So these are three braids of hand spun fiber. The first one came from, I think it's Corgi Hill Farm, and this is a colorway, a BFL silk called in a colorway called Cliff Forest. Sadly, Corgi Hill Farm no longer offers dyed fiber. Then the second one is another one of these apothecary hand-dyed braids that I picked up at Estes Wool Market in 2024. And then the third one, and that is see what it says here. It's Montana Corriedale, very soft. And then the third one is Superfine Merino from Three Waters Farm in a colorway called Sunlit. So, as I said, all these colors end up being very similar. My God, I'm killing myself here. But I chose, and they all would have been dyed in the way I just described, where the dyer takes a length of commercial top and sets it in a sort of zigzag, compressed zigzag, and then applies the colors across the skein. But I chose to spin each of these colorways in a different way. And let's see if I can now unravel how I did it, because I did not take very good notes, and this is what happens. So this middle one from Apothecary is a 2-ply, and I'm reasonably certain that I just took the length of top and split it down the middle and spun it as it comes and then plied it together. And the reason I'm pretty sure that that's what I did is when you look closely, you can see that sometimes very, very different colors end up being plied together, which gives a lovely marled effect. And the difference in hue of these colors will make for a really interesting fabric once I knit up or weave up this yarn. The BFL silk, in contrast, is and here's how we can tell, we find the end and we pull it apart a little bit, is a 3-ply. And I am reasonably certain that I chain plied this one, Navajo plied, because that's my favorite way to do 3-ply yarns and to keep the colors really distinct. There we go. I swear to you, there's 3 plies there. They're just got a little fuzzy. So I would have spun this top as it comes, just from one end of the braid to the other, all on one bobbin. And then as I plied, Navajo plied or chain plied, I took some pains that when I color changed, I made sure that it didn't wrap around a different color. And you do that just by varying how big your loops are as you're chain plying. And if you've never seen chain plying, it's really fun to do. So when I look at this yarn, this is my yarn tie. The color changes in here are not relevant to this yarn. When I look here, each color stays pretty distinct, and there's no marling, there's no combinations of different colors. Finally, on my Three Waters Farm braid, or actually, Marianne doesn't braid them, she just folds them in a bag, which is really nice because then you can see how the colors change. Uh, I pulled off all the yellow, and I pulled off all the darker blue, and I pulled off all the lighter blue, and I spun this as a gradient skein. So if I had caked it up before I started filming, you would have seen that all the yellow is at one end of this very long length of yarn, and then it shades to a different into different colors. So three very different effects on this yarn that will produce significant differences in the fabric they create, however that fabric is created. And in fact, now that I look at these three together and see how well they coordinate, it could be really fun to knit or weave a fabric that deliberately uses all of this yarn and then all of this yarn and then all of this yarn, just to show how color interactions and the amount of color in proportion to other colors changes. So just for yucks, let's imagine that I chose to weave with this yarn. And let's say that I decided I did not want nearly so much yellow. So looking at this in the skein would actually be a little misleading, because if I decided that my woven fabric was going to have just one strand of yellow for every, I don't know, 20 strands of the blues, it would look really different. So imagine that you can't see any of this yellow that I just tucked underneath. One strand of yellow just pops like nobody's business, whereas multiple strands of yellow all bunched together would give a very different effect. And this is what I mean about the fun with color. You don't have to be an art student. I haven't taken art since I was in high school, and yeah, so I had never really thought about this stuff until I started playing with fiber. But color is fun and delightful to play with. So don't be scared by it. Take chances, try different things, and sample, 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 sample. That is the single biggest thing that will affect how much you like your finished project. Is if you took some time to sample, and you don't have to do a million samples, but just try one sample and see if it's edging toward what you liked. And then don't be surprised if even after sampling, you end up with something a little unexpected. That's half the fun.